Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. All of you who have braved and crossed time zones and oceans and hemispheres to get here to this beautiful country, Uruguay. It's well worth the jet lag. And to all of our audiences pinging and joining in online, thank you as well, waking up earlier or staying later. We are here to celebrate World Press Freedom Day. And this conference, Journalism Under Digital Siege, we can't have something like that, unfortunately, without devoting a big chunk of it to women journalism, women journalists under digital siege, receiving basically a large amount of the toxicity, the violence, and the harassment. We've heard these stories, these harrowing stories up until now, and this is what we're here to do. This panel, of course, is going to be talking about our fighting back, women fighting back and offering solutions to this scourge. My name is Heba Kandil. I am an ex-journalist myself, although once a journalist, always a journalist. I am the senior manager of media initiatives at Thomson Reuters Foundation, and that is a corporate foundation of Thomson Reuters, the world's global news and information provider. And we work really to advance media freedom, foster inclusive economies, and promote human rights. We also focus on driving systemic change and really using the combined power of journalism and the law to bring that into effect. I am really honored to be joined today by a formidable panel of women. We have with us Patricia Georgiou, online, phoning in, Head of Partnerships and Business Development at Jigsaw. We also have on stage, at the far, over there on the far chair, Rocío Jimenez Calderon, Security Incident Handler at Access Now. And next to me, we have Jacqueline, Founder and Chief Product Officer at Areto Labs. Thank you so much for joining us today and to talk about what can we do and what is already being done and what more needs to happen to take back our power. I'm very excited today also to announce a tool that we, the foundation, have been working with together with Jigsaw, some kind of small response, again, to answer back and to give a solution and the power back to women journalists and actually anyone facing online harassment. So if we can play a small video to announce this, this tool and this solution.
Journalists around the world are facing a surge in online abuse and harassment. 70% of female journalists receive threats and harassment online. Unsurprisingly, this causes targeted journalists high levels of stress, serious psychological harm, and can even lead to offline abuse and self-censorship. More than 40% of female journalists stopped reporting a story as a result of experiencing online attacks. In addition to the harm this causes to individuals, online violence is threatening independent journalism as a whole. TRF Filter is the first tool that allows users to document and manage online harassment and abuse. Our partners at Google Jigsaw worked with NGOs, Twitter, and a group of regularly targeted journalists to create the underlying functionality. With TRF Filter, you're in control. To review, block, and document harmful comments and create reports as you see fit. Filter the abuse, switch off the noise, and focus on your mission as a journalist. Protecting independent journalism. Coming soon. Register your interest online.
Thank you. So again, TRF Filter is one such solution, but of course there are many, and I'm here with my panelists to talk about what needs to be done. But before we talk about the solutions, we really wanted to take some time and set the scene and to capture really and contextualize what the problem is and what's at stake. So I will pose the first question to Rocío. And again, Rocío, you have a very unique perspective. You're very much on the front lines, being a security incident handler, taking in questions, taking in these problems that are happening, and having to respond. So do you mind telling us a little bit about that role, and especially if you've been noticing any trends, in the nature and the frequency of the complaints of the attacks?
Yes, thank you very much. As you said, I'm an incident handler at the Digital Security Helpline at Access Now, and we directly receive incidents and requests from civil society around the world. We have been seeing an increase in the case of numbers during the past years. And so, for example, in 2018, we received 303 cases from journalists and media. But for 2021, we received an increase of 25% of the cases. And this, just this first 4 months of the year, we received an increase of 37 cases from the same period last year. So we can see that it has been increasing the incidents that journalists have been facing.
Can you give us an example of what's the nature of these complaints or the attacks?
Yes, we have been receiving like different cases related to compromised accounts, online harassment, but in the past months, we have been receiving especially incidents regarding sponsored state attacks. So these sponsored state attacks have been using this high-tech malware to compromise the devices of journalists around the world.
So, and have you noticed some of the gender breakdown? Has it been mostly has it been women, men? If you can give us some kind of description.
Yes. So these attacks has been for all journalists, but the violence that goes against women is really different. Not only for these malware high-tech attacks that we have been receiving lately, but during all the time that in the helpline where we've been receiving cases, the attacks that women received are especially based on their gender. So the attacks are completely different for men journalists and women journalists.
Misogynistic, yeah.
Yes, totally.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rocío. I turned to Jacqueline, and I wanted to also give you an opportunity to talk about Areto Labs and the problem that you noticed and that you were trying to solve that caused the creation of Areto Labs. And I know that you were telling me that it was in political representation, and you found that dismayingly more women were not representing themselves, were not putting themselves up for office. For different reasons, but when you took the time, you and your co-founders, to do a study, the common thread was we are taking ourselves off the scene because we don't want to face online violence and online harassment, and you thought that's just not right.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's our founding story at Areto Labs. We actually started an NGO just as women who saw a problem that there weren't enough people, women running for office. And so we did a lot of research, we talked to a lot of people, and as you said, we did find that among other reasons, the one thread was online abuse. And so we created this piece of technology that uses AI and specifically natural language processing to analyze all of the tweets that were sent to women political candidates, and it scored those tweets of whether or not they were toxic or not, and based on a country's general toxicity levels on Twitter, we set a threshold to trigger a bot that actually sent out positive messages for every negative one that was sent to a woman candidate. And that was our way to raise awareness of the issue and also to send out some positive vibes. And what we found doing some user experience research after, speaking with different political candidates, women political candidates, that they said that they had a perceived increased sense of safety just by having a bot. They knew it was a piece of software, just a bunch of code that was actually talking to them. But it did help them feel safer and also validated their experience the attack. What we find, and from our research since then, and looking at women journalists, women athletes, women influencers, actors, anyone really who uses social media for work, that we find that just someone to say, yes, that was actually a really crappy thing to be said, just someone to validate that experience really started to shift their mental well-being, and they felt seen. Yeah.
So that's really interesting, and I want to come back to that as well. And that's something that that was pretty much mentioned in the last panel about the importance of mental health and well-being, and that we're really facing not just an online violence crisis, but a mental health crisis. And it's so really important to factor that. Patricia, I want to also take this opportunity to ask you, from your perspective, how does Jigsaw see this problem, and what's really at stake?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and apologies I cannot be there in person. My health issues have not allowed me to get on the plane today. So, looking at this problem from a technology point of view is really an embodiment of Jigsaw's mission. We're a team at Google that looks at the biggest digital threats facing our democracies, and then we try to build technology responses to it. And as part of our daily work, we're very much in touch with people who are on the front lines of democracy, including journalists, activists, human rights defenders, political figures, or election monitoring organizations. So that's by understanding their experiences and needs, we can then build technology solutions that can better protect them. We travel to different places around the world to meet with these pillars of democracy, including, last week we're in Poland, for example, to understand the situation of journalists on the ground who are covering the crisis in Ukraine. And so, we talked to all of these stakeholders of democracy, and what we kept hearing was that women had it much worse than their male counterparts, and that while they're seeing the same thing in terms of techniques like internet censorship, disinformation, harassment, women had a disproportionate volume of that attack, especially female journalists, activists, but also that it had a disproportionate impact on their ability to participate in the coverage of news and in the internet in general. So it was important to us to understand the breadth and the depth of the problem, because it could drive women off the internet, which could have consequences for our society and economy at large. So like any focus area at Jigsaw, we start by conducting our own research as well as supporting third-party studies. So we did a global analysis of online violence against women with The Economist, as well as deeper research on the specific situation of journalists, as well as supporting our partners at UNESCO, ICFJ, and University of Sheffield, who are doing specific research on female journalists. And all the findings really point to the fact that targeted harassment is driving women offline, as well as journalists. So, almost all the women who have been surveyed have witnessed some form of online violence against women, and nearly half of them have actually experienced it themselves. And multiple threat techniques are used, sometimes in combination. So, it's not only hate speech, it can be also violent threats against themselves or their families, disinformation and discrediting the person's credibility, or stealing their password or hacking their accounts, as Rocío was mentioning. So not only does this online violence have personal and professional consequences for the targets, which are already significant. You were talking about mental health and PTSD, as well as professional consequences like either losing their jobs or sometimes even deciding to change careers. But even more broadly, it has a chilling effect on all the other women who witness this. They reconsider what to post online. They self-censor. The video was saying more than 40% of female journalists stop reporting a story as a result. So really, we see the potential consequences on democracy and free speech being a really important threat. And a lot of the discussions around what should tech platforms do will focus around the tension between free speech and moderation. But online toxicity, which is a focus area for us for the past few years, it's clear to us that moderation in the broad sense of interventions to remove toxic content is really what enables free speech. So we need to be able to build technology tools that can help detect and remove this online violence against women so that all those voices can be heard, especially those who have an important or an uncomfortable story to tell. Like, for example, Maria Ressa or Rana Ayub, who are criticizing the government in their coverage, but those voices can be actually, dismissed or even silenced by this online violence. So it's really important to be able to moderate this violence and do something about it so that these stories can reach us.
Yeah, and essentially, basically, trying to fighting back against women being pushed out of the public sphere. If you want to take it, if you want to take a broader angle, because again, this is gender-based violence, and in many ways, it just reflects what's happening offline, and that's something that we need to tackle. So more on that later. So if we sink down a little bit on a practical level to some of the solutions and how they're working and what else is out there, I'm going to go back and talk about filter, for example, TRF filter, and many other similar solutions like Areto Listener, and I'm sure other applications as well. But speaking to a lot of people in this field and media freedom actors, they say that a lot of the solutions that can take place or really are effective is preventative. What you can do to prevent rather the cyber hygiene that you maintain before something escalates, and then you have to go back and figure out what to do, how to remove data that you've leaked on the internet, and so that's part of it. That's the preventative. But then the other layer as well is once it happens, oftentimes women or the victims of this online harassment, they have to go back and also look for the toxic statements, download it as documented, as evidence, whether you want to, as proof, to turn back and to report it to the platform in order to take down the offensive messages, or maybe to report it to law enforcement. And the very act of going back to filter, to see what the messages are, to download that and to document it, is a kind of a re-traumatization of what you've already been through. And I know that one of the positive features of TRF filter is the fact that you can actually have that automated for you. So you can block and mute what is deemed as toxic and hateful, but you can also download automated reports, and then you can decide what to do later with it. Hopefully, whether you want to do research, send it for legal research and find the gaps in the policies, or again, to take action. But other than that, Patricia, I wanted to know, from Jigsaw's point of view, where do you think big tech should, and I know that you don't represent all of big tech, but where do you think big tech should focus their efforts on, like in terms of systemic solutions? That's the word we keep hearing in this conference.
Yeah, so I think, as I was saying, the focus has been a lot on moderation. So how do we remove online toxicity that is spreading across social media platforms? Just to clarify, Jigsaw does not own or manage social media platforms. So, whatever tools that we develop or recommendations of research we conduct is more intended to be a broader platform for others to use. So, for example, the code that is behind the Thomson Reuters filter is a code that we've open sourced. So we've developed a harassment manager after discussing the issue with a lot of journalists and activists who told us exactly the kind of tools that they need because of the gaps that we currently see. So right now, the platforms are really focusing on moderation. So we develop algorithms that can, better detect and extract the toxic comments. We actually invested a lot in this technology at Jigsaw. We developed an API called Perspective, which leverages machine learning to be able to read all the comments and then detect those that are potentially toxic. It is really helpful to the platforms because, human moderators cannot technically look at everything that's posted online. So being able to leverage AI to actually do that analysis for them and then remove what is actually toxic is really helpful. And we've really seen the positive impact of this technology because it allows a lot of platforms to much more quickly detect and remove what's toxic. So one really important aspect is actually making sure that these algorithms are constantly updated. And so, we have a feedback loop that allows people who are using our platforms like, news publishers or discussion forums like Reddit to give us feedback on what the algorithms are catching or not catching so that we can keep improving these algorithms. And a lot of platforms do that. They have collaborations with a lot of NGOs who monitor hate speech around the world to see, the kind of language that is used to target specific types of populations, specific ethnic, racial, religious groups, so that the algorithms are constantly keeping up to speed with the evolving language and linguistic, cultural nuances that are used to harass people online. So I think a big part is making sure that these algorithms are constantly updated. And, Rocío was talking about misogyny, and so was Jacqueline. We have a specific body of work around detecting specifically misogynistic language or memes. That's an ongoing academic collaboration. Okay. But to me, that is a really big part of how we can keep moderation up to speed in terms of how the world is evolving, so, or devising these algorithms. So I think that's a really important part. And then the cross-platform collaboration is really important too, because journalists can be attacked across multiple platforms. So
and concerted attacks.
We built the Thomson Reuters filter on top of Twitter, because that was the main platform where journalists were saying that they needed for their public activities, but that's also where they receive a lot of attacks. So we built that tool on top of Twitter. There's no reason why you couldn't expand this into a cross-platform tool by whoever decides to adopt it, so that the users can actually monitor and manage the harassment across multiple platforms. So that's another area of collaboration.
A lot of nuggets right now, Patricia. I'm gonna jump in there because several things stood out to me. And I know that I want the inputs of Rocío and Jackie as well on this side. I'm going to talk about, the tool. There's this tool. We've downloaded, it's filtered the abuse. I've downloaded the report. I've shielded myself from whatever trauma. And now I want the platform to take it down. Rocío, I know that we've had this conversation earlier today about the responsiveness of platforms now that you have this evidence. How has your experience, and you've talked a lot about context, not just providing the toxic, but providing the context, how the context of, and again, that also ties into language, the idea of language, how that differs from place to place. So can you share with the audience that example that you gave?
Yes, as we were discussing before, we at the helpline receive cases from all over the world. And sometimes at the helpline we have direct connection with some platforms, not all of them, but some platforms. And when we escalate a case, we usually need to do translation of the content that is harmful content. And we need to also provide context to the platforms, because most of the time, platforms doesn't have enough resources to have the complete personnel to do these things. So they ask us to do this. And when they ask us to do these things, we need to go back to the person that is facing, the victim, the person that is facing harassment, and we need to ask them for the context. So as you said before, we are re-victimizing these persons. And of course, platforms must take accountability for this.
Yeah, I remember when you were sharing this story, the first thing, I believe you were there, Jackie, as well, and I was like, a victim has to provide context for a barrage of toxicity. What context do you need to provide for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 really, really hateful slurs? But then you mentioned that example, for example, of if, let's say, a woman, one of the comments she received is that she's a lesbian, and that could be fine, okay, if maybe you're in this part of the world. If you are in another part of the world, the Middle East, North Africa, for example, that could be a death sentence. And that's the kind of context that, but unfortunately, it needs to be provided, but unfortunately, you say it gets tossed back to the victim or somebody else. And yeah. So that's also a big, I think that's an area that requires more attention to, exactly. Jackie, in terms of language, so Patricia was saying also in terms of language, and it also ties to that, to the whole idea of context. We were talking about how certain terms, or you need to feed the algorithms certain data to be able to recognize that, for example, the word black in some contexts is fine, is innocuous, but in other contexts it is hateful.
Yeah, exactly. Large language models, they can track whatever you put in. So if you put in data that says that the word black is always a positive thing, then it won't catch some of the usage of black. And this is a very simplified version of or explanation of how these models work. It won't tell you that black is negative. And yet, in a lot of cases, using that word can be a negative thing. So what we're looking at is building our own language model that, that looks at microaggressions, so looks at that unconscious bias, or sometimes it's conscious, but just covert. So covert, violent language, so that as we track the messages to journalists on Twitter or Instagram, that we can actually pick up some of those nuanced terms. One of the examples that we talk about is, with some women politicians, we found that, I live in New Zealand. I know I don't sound like a Kiwi, but I live there. And our Prime Minister's name is Jacinda Ardern. And on Twitter, she's often referred to as Cindy. And Cindy may be cute, but it is actually a sexist phrasing for the Prime Minister and a way to demean her and bring her down.
Make her frivolous, basically, in airheads.
Absolutely. And so, our current language models wouldn't be able to pick up Cindy as something toxic and then be able to respond in kind. So we're really working hard to create our own model, first looking at gender and then looking at, racial microaggressions, microaggressions to LGBTQ communities. So looking at those intersections as well as on top of gender to make sure that our tools are able to pick up those nuances.
Rocío, I'm going to ask you, go back to the security incident handler at the help desk. What have been some of the effective, we've listened to the problems that are coming your way. First of all, I'm going to be the third person to ask you the question of, how do you deal with it? I mean, you're not the journalist and you're not the person facing the abuse, but then you are kind of reliving it by documenting it. And how do you deal with it? Is there policy and access now for you to take care of your mental well-being?
Yes, well, actually, even though we are not the persons that are receiving the harassment, we deal with these cases on daily basis. So we at Access Now have this mental health program, because mental health, it matters, And we do have this program that we can access every time we need, and we also have we can support each other in cases. For example, if I receive a case from my region that affects me directly because maybe I can know some of the people living in the country and the situation is very hard, so I can hand over the case to other colleagues. But yes, this program, this mental health program, it's really important to us.
So my other question is, back now to the tools. What have been the most effective set of recourses or plans that you have given to people calling the helpline?
Okay, actually, the Access Now and the helpline itself, it's a part of different coalitions. Right now, we are part of the coalition against online harassment that is led by IWMF. And we do have a response hub, where journalists can join there and seek for an answer to whatever problem they're facing. Can be from digital security perspective, also from mental health. We have this hub full of tools and recommendations and resources that people can get to. And the helpline is also part of CiviCert, that is a coalition of rapid responders. And we have this tool that is named Digital First Aid Kit. You can find it online also, digitalfirstaid.org. And we do have a lot of resources there for journalists.
Okay. And that's been some of your... So back to, again, like talking about solutions and carrying the thread to Jackie, can you give us a deep dive of what Areto Listener, what does it do? And in terms of cross-platform, if you haven't picked it up already, your tool actually works with Twitter and also with Instagram. So again, addressing one of the points raised by the findings and the research in the previous panel, this need of cross-platform collaboration. Oftentimes, the toxicity jumps from platform to platform. So can you give us a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have two products, actually, one called Areto Listener and the other one called Areto Ally. And Areto Listener, so this is all for newsrooms. So we look at this problem as a newsroom issue rather than an individual issue, and that's because the emotional labor and the time-consuming labor it takes to report, to reread your messages, and to have to take that on as already a victim seems crazy. Like that's just not right. So we have a tool, Areto Listener, that tracks messages on Instagram and Twitter, and we're looking at other platforms as well. And it gives a newsroom an idea of what's it like out there. You know, which journalists are getting the most toxicity? Is there a spike in activity somewhere? Where is anyone unsafe in terms of, is an attack coming from a specific location? And so we can see it's from a specific location to this person that's around the corner. The call is coming from inside the house. You know, that sort of thing, so that the newsrooms have an idea of exactly what's going on. We always find that there's always, not to invoke Oprah, but an aha moment when we show newsroom editors, directors, the data. When we track journalists for a while and then show the data, and we show them how many messages are being sent, what the percentage, and how many are attacks, and then actually show them, the top 50 worst messages. That's oh, wow, okay, seeing it all in one place is really that moment where, perhaps the leaders of the newsroom might not be women, might also likely be white men, at least in the areas that we're working with newsrooms. And our content is so curated now that they don't see it. It doesn't exist in their world. And so once they actually see the data and see the numbers, that's when they think, okay, this is actually a problem. And then Areto Ally is our act. So we talk about track and act. So our action is all about sort of, recommending, block, report, mute these accounts based on, if it's bot activity, if it's, someone like a repeat offender. So looking at that sort of stuff. So acting that way, giving recommendations, but then also acting in terms of, real-time alerts. So if a journalist is receiving a spike in toxicity, we can send out a message to that journalist to say, hey, we see that, are you okay? Just checking in, just like our first iteration, our political bot did, that we know that it makes people feel safer. And so we do a check-in, but at the same time as doing a check-in with that journalist, we also send an alert to the newsroom to say, hey, just a heads up, this person is experiencing a spike in toxicity. You should probably check in as well.
Do you know if this has led to a change in newsroom policy to be much more reactive, much more gender sensitive, as we've been seeing?
Not yet.
Not yet. How about you share that big story and example, the one that you shared about the law, the use of the law for newsrooms, the success story, the woman who actually sued.
Oh yes, right. So. Interestingly, we're starting to see, and I think, with the UNESCO report talking about newsrooms having to take responsibility, their duty of care, that sits across, all aspects of anyone who needs to use social media for work. And there's a very big case going on in New Zealand right now for a microbiologist who was named New Zealander of the Year a year ago, thanks to her amazing science communication around COVID. And I think a lot of people here would know that New Zealand had a really great response to COVID. We were safe. We kept it out of the country for good or for bad. That was really, it was a nice first year anyway of the pandemic being in New Zealand. And she was the face of the communication there. And as a science communicator, especially a science communicator talking about COVID-19, she was getting a lot of attacks online, and
it was a trigger. It was a trigger thematic. Yeah.
Absolutely, and she's a woman. She has pink hair. She's not slender. I mean, there's so many things. You know, you can check on the box where
she doesn't stay within the lines of convention. Yeah,
and she was getting hammered, and she was not getting the support from her employer, and it got really bad where they told her that she just shouldn't be on the news. She shouldn't be online. She shouldn't share that information because she's doing it to herself. And there was another scientist as well who was in the same situation, and they actually took their employer to employment court, and they've won the first round. So there is recognition that, yes, actually these employers have a responsibility to keep their employees safe online, especially when they have to use social media for work. And so that's quite precedent setting. There's another case that's going to hit the news in Canada that's going to be the same thing. So I think the momentum is starting in terms of the responsibility of employers and maybe re-looking at labor laws.
So when I heard the story, I was telling Jackie and Rocío as well. It's interesting that it's actually labor law that they had to rely on, but there's still so much more to be done in terms of maybe cybersecurity, other types of laws to come into play. But then again, there's that as a stopper, as a deterrent. Rocío, I know that as well. We've discussed this before. About the fact that it seems that so far all the solutions put the onus on the victim and nothing being done about the other players, the perpetrators.
Yes, actually, we always talk about preventative work, and when we say preventative is the journalists, the persons that are facing this harassment, who is not only doing their work, but they also have to protect themselves while doing it. So they have to take these measures before. It's a lot of work to do. Then do their work. And if they receive any kind of harassment or online violence, they also have to go and search for answers. So all the responsibility is on the individuals, but there is actually a complete ecosystem around this. Politicals, big tech, all kind of actors must take responsibility on this. So we need to liberate a little bit it's not liberate, it's like the responsibility of the rest of actors on stopping of online violence against at-risk users all around the world.
And on that note, I know, Patricia, we've discussed this as well before, and you're very passionate about the fact that the law policy and the law needs to come into effect as well. It's there's so many different participants in this ecosystem, and especially again the idea of cross-platform collaboration. So, do you have any latest inputs on that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we don't talk about enough is how much toxic content the platforms are actually taking down, and how many user accounts are suspended. I mean, in the last year or two, it's really incredible to see how much of that toxicity is being addressed by platforms. And I think in terms of the policy framework, there's definitely much more that could be done to really zoom in on what constitutes misogyny or hate speech, so that we can actually have some responses. We focused a lot on making sure that the harassment manager or the Thomson Reuters filter can actually help victims generate a report without re-traumatizing them, so they don't have to read all the comments, and they can just extract the toxicity thanks to the machine learning technology behind it. But once that report is generated, we really need to rely on, law enforcement to be able to take some action around it. So if that regulatory framework isn't in place, if there's not enough resources in, police, and they're not sufficiently educated and incentivized to tackle it, then, it's really not going very, very far. So I think it's really a matter of, having policymakers up to speed. And I think it's a lot of the work that the NGOs and the advocacy work that NGOs like TRF can do to really help push the boundaries there, because I think there's a lot of room for improvement from that point of view.
And another different facet or angle to this, I would imagine, is something that Jackie also brought up, and that's the idea of culture and culture mindset. And I know it's been touched upon in the previous panel as well, talking about the macho newsroom, and it really is a bigger issue, and it's just basically the remnants of a macho society and the macho societies that do exist. Overall, gender violence. And Jackie, I remember you saying that there's this, another, of course, actors in this space saying that there's almost this sense that online, anything can happen, it's fine, it's impunity. So I can do anything, get away with it, that I would never get away with it, I wouldn't even try offline. And there needs to be this mindset shift that it's actually not okay. You had like a poignant example that you shared. Go ahead.
Sure, I'm gonna say this.
Say it
on the stage. That since the iPhone has been around, which I think was 2009 or 2010, there have been dick pics. And if you've done online dating, or you have a friend that's done online dating, chances are they've received an unsolicited dick pic. And it's now 2022, and I saw that last month in the UK they announced that they might be sending somebody an unsolicited dick pic to be illegal. Now, if you can imagine walking down the street and somebody exposing themselves to you in real life,
there would be consequences
exactly,
immediately.
You could charge them. There's a law.
You don't need to provide context.
Exactly. Exactly. I was walking down the street. That's the context. And yet our laws aren't keeping up with the technology, and we can't live in a world where it takes 12 years to deal with something that is blatant. Like it's not insidious. It's not hidden. It's there. Everyone talks about it. It's just a given, and that's not okay. And so we need our laws to keep up with the technology, but we also need, to do something about it. I think we talk about, the big tech companies doing something. We talk about the newsrooms. We talk about the individuals. But I think also as bystanders, we need to do something as well. I think we're scared. I think a lot of people are scared to stand up for people on social media because you don't want to get what the others receive.
Being silent is complicit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what we know from a lot of research is that if you send a positive message to the person being attacked, that will turn into a positive change. Not only will it support the journalist who's getting attacked online and make them feel safe, but it also starts to shift the culture and set the bar for what is acceptable communication and language to this network of people. There's a Canadian senator who is an ex-journalist, and she likes to say that she activates her hive. And when she's curated a really great following on Twitter, and anytime she tweets something that gets a reaction from trolls, her hive, so her community steps up and pushes back. And so we're trying to think of ways that we can do that digitally to start to activate people's hives so that we can have a community approach to actually making change on these platforms, because like social media is people, and we're people too, and trolls are, well, it's not always people actually, sometimes trolls are just software, but we can actually start to tell people what is and isn't acceptable.
This concerted event so you don't feel isolated. And again, if you work for a newsroom, having your editor respond, having the New York Times or the Reuters or the Guardian come in and put out a statement and message that it's not okay, having your community of journalists across the border, and we've seen that as Thomson Reuters Foundation in some of the courses that we've trained, elections would be happening. And again, we know elections is one of the peak times of misinformation and really concerted attacks of disinformation on journalists just reporting the facts. Having a person cover her beat and then getting attacked online, and getting some of her allies and peers across the border in Tanzania and Kenya coming to her defense and just basically responding to that. I think it's a deterrent as well. Rocío, I know that Access Now, I know you handle the security helpline, but in Access Now, again, we at TRF, we speak about the multi-stakeholder approach, and that's a word that we've been hearing over and over again in this conference. And I know that Access Now uses the phrase intersectional approach as well. So what other levers are you pulling to really address this issue?
Yes, well, at Access Now we have different arms that we work. We have the legal side because legal is always needed. We have also advocacy. We have the policy because it's really important to have impact on the different politics
the ecosystem
around, yeah, and the helpline that we help at-risk users directly, yeah.
I also want to bring in, well, it's not the elephant in the room because I have heard it mentioned, you can't get away from it, but the takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk, the whole idea of content moderation versus free speech, and it seems almost to go into separate sort of directions. But if I can have some responses from all three speakers about, are they optimistic? Where do you see that happening? What's in store for us and for social media? Patricia?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really way too early to tell. We don't know which direction, Elon Musk will take in terms of the balance between free speech and moderation. What I can say is that from, Jigsaw, Google point of view, it's clear to us that, like I was saying before, it's not a tension. I think they're very complementary. We need some moderation, some interventions to remove the layers of toxicity so that there can be more voices around the room that can express themselves. Otherwise, the loudest and sometimes meanest voices will end up shouting everyone else out of the room. So we really very much believe that having an approach to interventions to remove the toxic content is very important to be to basically protect the internet and protect our democracies and the digital public square. So that's why we've invested a lot in this space, including building technology that machine learning models that can help detect and then moderate toxicity online. But we'll see in which direction this goes. But what encourages me in Elon Musk's recent comments is the focus on transparency and open sourcing. That's something that we very much have emphasized around everything that we do at Jigsaw. So our algorithms, our research, including on debiasing models, all of this is open source so that other people can build on it. The code behind Thomson Reuters filter, which is called harassment manager, that is also open source, so that multiple platforms can use it. And to the extent that the Twitter APIs can still be accessible, I think tools like harassment manager can continue to provide help to the journalists and the communities that need this kind of tool around the world. So I think it's too early to tell, but I definitely think that being able to remove toxicity is part of what will enable us to protect the voices and the front lines of democracy.
So there is an inherent reason, inherent sort of benefit that would be convincing enough to keep content moderation, that it doesn't affect free speech. But if I flip sort of the argument and play devil's advocate, do you think that people would say that content moderation can be used as a pretext for going after free speech? What are your thoughts about it, Jackie?
Wow, you're just throwing that one to me. Okay. Yeah, I mean, could it be? Maybe. Will it be? I don't know. I think, yeah, I don't I think people who don't understand what content moderation is, you hear content moderation, maybe you think
Censorship.
Exactly. When content moderation is really just consequences to action. So it is, you say something awful, not everyone has to hear it. That's content moderation. You say something awful, we're going to say something that's positive and make sure the person that you just said that to has the mental health support that they don't quit their jobs and leave their career. I mean,
non-threatening.
Yeah. And so, like, free speech and freedom of expression doesn't exist if you don't have any moderation. It is, as you were saying, that it's the loudest, meanest people have the say. They own the public square, and everyone else hides. We know that women journalists self-censor. I self-censor. I think about, you probably self-censor.
I haven't been on Facebook for a long time.
Yeah, I think twice about things that we do. We a couple of weeks ago, one of the co-founders at Areto Labs met the Prime Minister of Canada, and we had a not long debate, but about 15-minute debate about whether or not we should post anything about it, even though it was exciting news and it was on the back of, you know, getting some funding. And we worried, like, if we show a picture of us with the Prime Minister of Canada, who also gets a lot of abuse, what are we going to attract? And it was like, it makes no sense. Like, we should be able to celebrate this event for ourselves, and yet we had to second guess.
I mean, I think it's no longer a luxury. It's an inevitability. If you're a journalist, definitely, you mine for sources. And also like on a professional basis, you brand yourself, personal branding, in order, if you're a freelance journalist, to have your CV up there and alive just to get the next gig. You were talking about you work with influencers and politicians running for office. And you had this good story about female athletes, basically, that because they're not as, I guess they're not as sponsored, they have to put themselves out there and gain some traction. And so it's like a matter of viability as well. So there's no escape from the need for social media. Rocío, I want to hear your thoughts as well about content moderation, free speech, from your perspective.
Yes, well, in the past years, in the Central America region, we have been seeing troll centers that are actually people from governments dedicated to harass activists and journalists. And we have seen a lot of content taken down because all of these troll centers constantly report specific content or report specific accounts of journalists, the people that it's doing their job. And yes, content moderation can become a censorship. I'm sorry?
A pretext, an excuse?
Yes, a pretext to censorship the work that the people is doing. Yeah.
So,
but I think, this is why context matters so much. When you were saying, you know, it can be flipped on its head, and moderation can be a censorship tool. This is why context matters so much, and unfortunately, there's no way around it. We need the context to be able to make a decision either way.
And until we automate it, I guess, automate context, we'd have to have human labor to come in and provide that level of intelligence. I think we have 5 minutes left, but if you were to choose, well, first of all, I'd like to go around the room and say, what's one big, exciting project that you're working on that fits in the context of a response and a solution and fighting back against gender-based online harassment? Patricia, what's the next big thing?
I mean, we're continuing to work on a lot of things that I already mentioned. So the algorithms that we've developed around perspective, that is the machine learning ability to detect toxic comments and then, you know, moderate them. We're continuing to work on improving and expanding their impact. So this year alone, we've released 10 new languages, and we're hoping to continue expanding in new languages so it can help detect and moderate toxicity in more countries around the world. And also investing in misogyny detection in particular. So we're hoping that, you know, the academic collaborations that we have will enable us to detect better misogyny in particular. Also, we've worked with NYU on developing models that can help identify calls to harassment online, including doxing, because, you know, sharing somebody's PII is a technique that is disproportionately used to silence and intimidate women online with threats to their physical integrity. So, you know, all of these are ways that we're hoping to continue expanding the reach of our machine learning algorithms. And obviously, we're excited to see the adoption and the scale and the ability of Thomson Reuters filter to help journalists around the world, and to have a feedback loop so that we can learn from the users, you know, what are the things that are missing,
Exactly.
feedback on the models, and obviously expanding its reach.
Constant iteration and listening to our users and the people most affected. Again, one of the policy recommendation of the reports and finding. What about you, Jackie? The next big thing that you're working on?
Can I make it a couple of things?
Yes, please,
okay,
go ahead.
Awesome. So we're looking at expanding across more platforms. So as I said, we're on Twitter and Instagram now. I think Facebook's not that far behind. And as we talk to more journalists to understand where they're feeling unsafe, we'll start to work on being able to connect our technology to those platforms. So that's really exciting work. And the other thing is really honing in on identifying bot accounts and coordinated attacks. So those are a couple of things where, you know, if we can detect bots and those are auto report and block, and you don't feel bad and worried that someone's going to see that you blocked it and therefore create another account. So looking at that, and then coordinated attacks. So we know that that happens a lot. We know that, you know, if you can see the same set of words used over and over and over again, the person receiving it sees it every single time and feels it every single time. That if we can start to identify those coordinated attacks, it becomes easier to bulk report. And also to be able to let that person know, like, we see this as a coordinated attack. Hey, newsroom, like, this is important for you to know, and talk to your other newsrooms around the world about this. But then also make sure that the journalists or journalists that are receiving those attacks, the coordinated attacks, feel safe.
Rocío, the next most effective thing that you're working on, you would like to see, like a missing gap that you'd like filled?
Yes, actually, we are hoping to get answers from the big tech, because we continually keep asking for resources to provide support to at-risk users all around the world. And what we are requesting is invest in protecting at-risk users, because they are using platforms to do their jobs, and they sometimes are risking their lives. So they deserve that the platforms invest enough in protecting them. And not only protecting them, but also creating technology from the beginning, using the experience of the people that is going to use these platforms. For example, always ask journalists, women, how would they like to have this technology being created, not only as users, but also as part of the design of these technologies. We will continue pursuing also from the policy side to request governments to create laws specifically to protect also privacy, freedom of speech, and all these digital rights, because as Jacqueline said before, it's been taking so long to create.
To catch up.
Yes, to catch up into what's going on, into all the violence that at-risk users are facing around the world, and specifically women, because it's not the same violence that men is receiving online than women is receiving online. This is something important that you said before, because you said we still need people to be moderating things, because it has a specific things, specificities on the violence that women are facing that maybe the artificial intelligence cannot resolve right now.
Yeah, so feeding the artificial intelligence, but also stepping in there to check and make sure that it still makes sense and within context. Thank you for that, Rocío. And from our side, I think the next big thing is watch this space. Please, for everyone to register for this tool, TRF tool, going to be launched in June. And again, for us, it's, yes, it's an immediate tool that is free to use to help you protect your well-being, to free yourself so you can still continue to work, whatever your work may be. But also for us as well to take it to the next level, to really listen to what the data says, and to hopefully do more research on the legal side, and again, bringing the power of journalism and the law to bring some solutions, effective solutions. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Patricia, logging in online. You're very much part of this panel. We feel you. Thank you so much. I want to thank Jacqueline.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. And Jacqueline Comer, Rocío. Thank you, everyone in the audience and people online. It's been a wonderful, wonderful panel. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Heba.
Thank you.